Patricia shoved the violation notice against my chest before I could even close the door. Her eyes flicked down at the wooden ramp beneath my feet, like it was some kind of crime scene. "Remove it by the end of the week or face escalating fines," she said, smug and steady, as if my wife's health didn't matter. She wasn't just threatening me, she was threatening the only safe way Elena could leave our home. I looked her square in the eye and let the words fall with a weight she didn't expect. "That ramp is ADA compliant, and I built it myself." I didn't raise my voice, but the sharpness made her flinch. For a moment, her confidence cracked. She didn't know the depth of what I had just revealed, and that was exactly how I wanted it. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I stepped onto the ramp, letting my boots knock against the boards my father had cut decades ago. "Daniel Reyes," I told her calmly, my tone more steady than my pounding heart. "Structural engineer. My work keeps bridges from collapsing and office towers from killing people. And this ramp, it's not just safe, it's stronger than anything in this neighborhood. You picked the wrong man to test." The boards carried a scent of old pine every time the sun hit them. They weren't just wood. They were my father's last gift, salvaged from his workshop after he passed. I'd promised myself I'd find a way to honor him with every piece, and here they were, holding up the woman he never got to meet, the mother of his first grandchild. Elena's pregnancy had been hard, filled with bed rest and sudden collapses. Every trip to the hospital meant life or death. That ramp wasn't decoration. It was the line between safety and disaster. Patricia's lips curled as if none of that mattered. She rattled off something about neighborhood aesthetics and uniformity, but I barely heard her. My chest burned with the memory of my father handing me his worn carpenter's square, saying, "Build something that lasts longer than me." Now the HOA wanted to tear it apart as if it were trash. They weren't just targeting my wife, they were spitting on his memory. I leaned against the post at the top of the ramp, letting Patricia stew in the silence. "Where are you watching from?" I asked softly, almost to myself. But I wanted everyone listening, neighbors, family, even strangers who might one day face the same tyranny, to feel it. Because I knew something Patricia didn't. This wasn't going to end the way she expected. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I let her walk away with her clipboard, convinced she'd won. But deep inside, a switch had flipped. She had no idea she'd just declared war on a man trained to find every crack in a structure until the whole thing came down. And I was already seeing the fractures in her perfect little empire. She thought she was enforcing the rules. What she didn't realize was that she had just stepped onto the wrong foundation, and it was about to collapse beneath her. Patricia's heels clicked down the sidewalk, her clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon she couldn't wait to use again. I stood on the ramp until she disappeared around the corner, the weight of her words still pressing on me. The violation wasn't just about us anymore. It was about control, and if she thought I'd roll over, she was in for a rude awakening. That evening I walked the neighborhood. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that hangs heavy when people are afraid to speak up. Lawns were cut to the same height, hedges trimmed into identical cubes, but beneath the neatness, I felt the tension. Patricia had spread her roots deep into every cul-de-sac, and people had learned it was safer to stay silent than to resist. I noticed the Johnsons across the street staring at their mailbox, a bright orange tag slapped across it. The father bent down, peeled it free, and crumpled it in his fist before glancing nervously up and down the road. His little boy tugged on his sleeve, asking something I couldn't hear, but the man just shook his head and stuffed the notice in his pocket. Their mailbox was painted a shade darker than regulation gray. That was their crime. 2 houses down, Mrs. Keller's porch swing was gone. She'd told Elena weeks earlier how much she loved sitting there with her tea at dusk. Now the brackets hung empty, rust stains streaking the siding. I could still picture Patricia smirking as she wrote up the citation. Something about unapproved exterior fixtures. That swing wasn't hurting anyone, but it was gone because Patricia decided it didn't fit her idea of uniformity. I passed the cul-de-sac and caught a glimpse of a neighbor rolling his trash can back inside the garage, muttering under his breath. The lid had been left open, and for that, he'd been fined. Another family had their kid's basketball hoop removed. Yet another had their garden dug up because the flowers weren't on the HOA approved list. Every home I looked at told the same story: fear, silence, submission. The worst part? Nobody dared talk about it. Eyes turned away when I walked by, as if acknowledging what was happening might invite Patricia's wrath. It was like living under occupation, the neighborhood's spirit stripped away in the name of standards. And now, with my ramp, she'd picked a fight that went beyond aesthetics. She was threatening lives. When I got back to the house, Elena was resting on the couch, her hand on her belly, her face pale from another rough day. I kissed her forehead and tried to smile, but inside, I was burning. Every neighbor I'd passed carried the same fear she was feeling, and Patricia was feeding off it. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was building a kingdom, brick by brick, with our fear as the mortar. I stood at the window, staring out at the cul-de-sac where the streetlight flickered. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about saving the ramp. This was about breaking the cycle she had created. If I let her tear down what mattered most to us, everyone else would know resistance was impossible. But if I stood my ground, maybe, just maybe, they'd see another way. The night air pressed against the glass, heavy with the smell of cut grass and chlorine drifting from the pool down the street. I remembered my father's words, that buildings are only as strong as their foundations. This neighborhood's foundation was crumbling, not from neglect, but from fear. And I wasn't going to let Patricia keep building on that rot. My fists clenched, the fines, the threats, the humiliation. She thought they made her untouchable. But I'd spent my career spotting cracks no one else noticed. And tonight, walking through this neighborhood, I saw cracks everywhere. Patricia had overreached. She didn't know it yet, but her structure was already failing. I turned back to Elena, her breathing steady now, the faintest smile softening her face as she drifted into sleep. I knew I couldn't tell her everything yet. She had enough to carry. But I whispered anyway, my voice low enough for only the walls to hear. She's not winning this time. Not here, not with us. The ramp outside creaked as the night settled in, a reminder of what was at stake. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was defiance. It was survival. And tomorrow, Patricia would learn that I wasn't the only one watching. Patricia's voice still rang in my ears as I stood by the playground gate, the metal bars cool against my palm. She had tossed out her warning, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The parents nearby had heard it too, though most pretended not to. That was the trick with bullies in power. They relied on silence from the crowd, but silence always had cracks. That's when I noticed him. Daniel Harper, the HOA's treasurer, lingered near the benches with his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. His shoulders were hunched, his foot tapping against the concrete in an uneven rhythm. He wasn't joining Patricia's laughter or the approving nods of the board members flanking her. He looked like a man watching a slow-motion train wreck, but unsure whether to jump off or stay strapped in. Our eyes met for the briefest second, and he quickly looked away, adjusting his glasses like they were suddenly too heavy. His discomfort was obvious, but so was his loyalty conflict. Daniel had voted with Patricia before, yet the tightening of his jaw told me he wasn't as sure about her latest stunt, threatening my family while my pregnant wife rested in the hospital. I let that moment linger, filing it away. Allies didn't always announce themselves with loud declarations. Sometimes they showed up through fidgeting hands, a voice that cracked, or a glance that lasted too long. And right then, Daniel's whole body was screaming a truth he wasn't ready to say out loud. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Patricia said, her voice sugar-coated poison. Shame if a family couldn't enjoy it because of violations. She smirked as if the swing set behind me had turned into a courtroom. Violations? I repeated softly, keeping my tone calm. Funny word, Patricia. You keep using it like it means something. My voice carried just enough for the parents to hear. Some of them shifted uneasily, others pretended to focus on their kids climbing the jungle gym. But I caught the quick glance one mother threw my way. A silent acknowledgement, maybe even quiet support. Daniel's hand moved to his collar, tugging at it as though the air had suddenly thickened. His foot tapped faster. I could see the battle playing out in his body. Loyalty to the board, fear of Patricia, and the weight of his conscience. He knew something important. But he wasn't ready to speak, not yet. I decided not to press him directly. Pushing too soon could send him running back into Patricia's camp. Instead, I turned my words toward the group, though my eyes occasionally drifted to him. You all know why my wife and I planted that maple tree by our driveway, I said. My throat tightened as I spoke, but I kept my voice steady. It was for my father. He passed 3 years ago. He taught me everything I know about building things, about doing things right, about never backing down from bullies. That tree isn't just a tree, it's a piece of him. So, when Patricia calls it a violation, understand, she's not just attacking roots and branches, she's attacking a legacy. The air grew heavier. Patricia's smirk faltered, if only for a heartbeat. And Daniel's fidgeting stilled. His eyes flickered toward me with something new, recognition, maybe guilt. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but no words came. He pressed them shut again, biting down hard. I stepped closer to the gate, letting the metal creak under my weight. I'm not moving it, and I'm not bowing to threats. If that tree falls, it won't be because of HOA fines. It'll only be because nature had its way. Until then, I'll fight for it. And I promise you, Patricia, I let the pause stretch just enough to make her lean forward. You picked the wrong man's family to target. A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Patricia stiffened, then spun on her heel, storming off with 2 board members trailing behind her. The others scattered quickly, eager to avoid being caught in the storm brewing between us. But Daniel stayed seated. His fingers drummed against his knee, faster now, a nervous staccato. He looked like a man who had swallowed too many secrets, and I just knew, when the time came, he'd either save himself by staying silent or save all of us by speaking the truth. Now, though, I left him to wrestle with his conscience. I had bigger battles to prepare for, and his silence was already more revealing than he realized. I turned toward the path leading home, the shadows of the maple tree stretching long across the sidewalk, my father's tree, my family's ground. Patricia thought this was just about power and rules, but for me, it was blood, legacy, and survival, and I wasn't walking away. Marcus didn't waste time. By the next morning, I woke up to the sound of an engine idling outside my house. I pulled back the blinds and saw his silver SUV parked squarely across my driveway, blocking me in. He leaned against the hood, sipping coffee from a thermos like he owned the place. On the windshield of my truck sat another bright orange violation notice, its adhesive corners pressed down with smug precision. I stepped outside, my voice steady. "You're blocking access. That's trespassing." Marcus smirked without moving. "No, it's enforcement. You're in violation, and until it's addressed, you don't get to play the victim." That single word, victim, lit something inside me. Not because I was afraid, but because it was so calculated. He wanted me to lose my temper. He wanted me to snap in front of neighbors, to look like the unstable one. Instead, I took a slow breath, pulled out my phone, and began recording. His posture stiffened for half a second before he relaxed again, pretending it didn't matter. "If you've ever had a bully try to bait you," I said quietly, more to the lens than to him, "you know the silence eats at them faster than yelling ever could." Behind me, the roses along my walkway stirred in the morning breeze. My father had planted them years ago, a line of thorned guardians tracing the curve of the yard. I looked at them and thought about how he used to say every bloom carried its own defense, beauty, and sharpness entwined. Those roses weren't just plants, they were his legacy. The thing Marcus was trying to bulldoze into compliance. By the time I turned back, Marcus had peeled his SUV out of the way with a quick screech of tires, but not before tossing another notice onto the grass. This one wasn't about the roses. It was about unapproved medical equipment. The generator humming quietly beside my porch, keeping backup power for when Emily needed it, was now on his radar. I felt the air shift colder around me. That generator wasn't optional. It was tied directly to the monitors in our bedroom, the ones that watched Emily's vitals while she fought through restless nights. Without it, she was vulnerable, and Marcus had just declared war on it. Later that afternoon, I drove to the community pool to clear my head. I figured he wouldn't follow me there, but he was already posted by the lifeguard chair, clipboard in hand, pretending to check chemical levels. When I approached, he didn't look up. "You're stacking violations, Daniel. 3 now. 1 more, and it escalates." "Escalates to what?" I asked, though part of me already knew. He tapped the clipboard with his pen. Fines, liens, foreclosure proceedings, the whole playbook. The words were sharp, delivered loudly enough for the parents nearby to hear. A few shifted uncomfortably in their lounge chairs. Some looked away. Others whispered. I caught Victor, the conflicted witness from yesterday, watching from the shaded picnic table. His hands were clasped together, knuckles pale. He looked like a man torn in half, wanting to stand up but anchored by fear of reprisal. I held his gaze for a long moment. He blinked, then dropped his eyes to the ground. That was all Marcus needed to sense victory. Face it, Marcus said, leaning closer so only I could hear. This community bends to whoever has the guts to make the rules stick, and that isn't you. But that smug confidence was his mistake, because in that moment, something clicked in my mind. He wasn't just enforcing rules, he was weaponizing them. And by overreaching into areas he had no legal right to touch, he was exposing cracks in the foundation of the entire HOA's authority. I walked away from the pool with my fists unclenched, but my mind sharper than ever. If Marcus wanted to play power games, he'd learn quickly that my background wasn't just construction. It was code compliance. State, federal, municipal. I'd written entire reports on the exact boundaries he was now trampling over. And buried in those codes were limits he couldn't cross, not without sinking the entire board into liability. Back at home, Emily asked why I looked so calm. I told her the truth. Because Marcus just handed me his biggest mistake yet. I didn't explain further, not yet. But as I stood at the edge of the yard, staring at my father's roses swaying defiantly against the fence, I knew the first fault line in Marcus's empire had just cracked wide open. He thought the generator was leverage. He thought fines would break us. But he didn't realize that every threat he made was another nail in his own coffin. And I intended to drive each one in, one by one, until the board he represented collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. I didn't sleep much that night. The roses in the yard were still damp with dew when I climbed into my truck and drove toward the clubhouse, the place where we'd once held summer barbecues and holiday parties. Patricia had turned our communal spaces into minefields, but I needed to see the bigger picture with my own eyes. If there were cracks in her authority, there might be cracks in the things she'd ignored. The clubhouse smelled faintly of mildew and old varnish. I signed in, then slipped past the common room toward the maintenance corridor. My city committee badge felt heavier than it should have. I pushed open the equipment door and nearly tripped over frayed insulation. Wires ran like exposed veins along the ceiling. Some taped in hasty loops, others scorched where someone had tried to channel too much power through a single line. The breaker box was labeled in handwriting that didn't match any standard. A cart of swollen pool chemicals leaned by a cracked containment tray patched with duct tape. The labels were faded. I pictured last summer's kids shrieking in the shallow end, unaware how close they'd swum to a volatile can. If one ruptured, the fumes could do worse than sting eyes. Structural cues were worse. A support beam near the locker room showed hairline fractures. Ceiling tiles were stained from chronic leaks. A pressure gauge on the heater had been taped over, the needle resting in a range that screamed, unsafe. I took out my phone and began documenting. Photos, angles, notes, the way I always did. Near the pool house doorway, a young lifeguard watched me with an anxious look and pointed toward the heater room, as if he wanted me to see. "You should see the heater," he said, voice low. I nodded and walked on. The deeper I went, the more it added up. A corroded support under the diving board looked like it could fail under the wrong weight. An improperly installed hot water line ran too close to electrical conduits. Even the ADA pool lift, the same kind of equipment Patricia'd been obsessed with, had a missing bolt on its mounting plate. If that bolt failed while someone relied on it, the consequences would be disastrous. I called a colleague on the city safety committee and spoke in clipped technical terms. He told me to photograph everything, secure the scene, and escalate it to the inspectorate. I did all three, hands steady though my chest trembled. This was the opening I'd been looking for. Clear violations that couldn't be shrugged off as petty enforcement. Before I left, I stood in the doorway and let the space imprint itself. The sagging tiles, the taped gauge, the chemical cans. I thought of Elena, sleeping at home, and pictured what could happen if a bolt failed, if a chemical can ruptured. I turned my phone's camera to one last shot, the image of the ADA lift with its loose bolt in plain view. My mind kept tracing liability scenarios. I pictured a family filing suit, an inspector shutting the pool for months, insurance premiums spiking across the board, Those were concrete consequences, hard to wave away with a clipboard and a smile. Patricia had been busy polishing facades while the nuts and bolts were loosening beneath them. That cognitive dissonance hardened into resolve. This was no longer a personal battle. It was a public safety issue I had an obligation to address. A rusted ladder in the storage closet bore gouges consistent with misuse, and the heater's relief valve had a suspicious damp patch beneath it, evidence of repeated pressure incidents someone had ignored. None of this felt accidental. It felt like negligence layered over vanity. Patricia had been policing porches while letting the community's bones rot. I messaged a neighbor who'd once complained about the pool plumbing and urged them to check the area. If others saw the same problems, it had become harder for the board to ignore. I'd rather build a coalition than bully Patricia into an argument. Driving home, the sun climbed a little higher. I kept the photos on my screen and rehearsed the steps I'd take, compile evidence, call inspectors, get the community on record. Patricia's priorities were transparent now, appearance over care. That mistake would be her downfall. I stepped inside quietly. Elena smiled in her sleep, unaware, and the work began. I laid my phone on the nightstand and watched the screen go dark. Tomorrow I'd start putting it together, one measured move at a time. By morning, the violations I'd recorded at the clubhouse felt like fire in my pocket. Every photo was another nail waiting to be driven in. But Patricia wasn't done. She must have sensed my silence wasn't surrender, because by the time I walked outside, a certified letter was taped to my front door in red ink. Final warning. The letter claimed my generator was unauthorized industrial equipment and a noise hazard. The language was surgical, each sentence designed to strip away my reasons for keeping it. But all I saw was Emily's pale face from the night before, her chest rising slow and shallow, while the monitors hummed. That generator wasn't just a machine, it was her shield. Patricia had chosen the wrong battlefield. I tucked the letter in my jacket and drove to my office downtown. The hum of fluorescent lights was familiar, almost comforting. I pulled the evidence onto my workstation, 2 monitors glowing with the pictures from the clubhouse. One by one, I zoomed in, wires split open, chemical labels unreadable, the ADA pool lift bolt barely clinging to its base. Then I cross-checked the HOA bylaws with state safety codes. My pulse quickened. The board had overreached on my property while neglecting non-negotiable compliance standards inside community facilities. Section 814 of the bylaws gave them enforcement power only for aesthetic uniformity and neighborly conduct. Nowhere did it authorize them to bypass municipal safety codes or harass residents for medical devices protected under federal law. Patricia hadn't just picked the wrong fight, she'd walked into a liability minefield. A colleague leaned in through my doorframe, a city inspector I trusted. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. I turned the screen so he could see. He whistled low. "That's a Class C violation waiting to blow. You file a report yet?" "Not yet," I answered, my voice steady. "I'm building it airtight first." He tapped the ADA lift photo. "This one's the kill shot. If that fails, the HOA's on the hook for negligence. Insurance carriers don't forgive that." When he left, I sat back and let the weight settle. The path was clear now. Patricia thought fines and threats would wear me down, but I had leverage she couldn't spin, a documented trail of failures that made her enforcement not just hypocritical, but dangerous. That evening, I returned home to find Victor, our conflicted neighbor, standing by the curb. He didn't wave, but his posture gave him away. Shoulders tight, eyes darting between my house and the clubhouse down the street. He wanted to talk, but couldn't, not yet. His silence was its own message. Patricia's shadow stretched longer than I'd realized. Inside, Emily asked how the roses looked that day. I told her they were still blooming, still holding their ground. She smiled faintly, and I felt the steel return to my spine. Those roses weren't just plants, they were the last gift from my father, his way of saying beauty could survive even in a place hostile to it. Patricia wanted them cut, but in her obsession, she'd exposed her blind spot. That night, I compiled a preliminary report, layering photos with code citations. Every violation tied back to a statute Patricia should have known. My desk was littered with sticky notes, arrows, cross-references. By midnight, I had a draft strong enough to send. I paused, though. Timing mattered. If I fired too early, she'd spin it as harassment. If I waited too long, Emily's safety would hang by a thread. So, I made a promise to myself. One more day of tightening the noose. One more day to gather Victor's silent support. To make sure when the strike landed, it wouldn't just be me against Patricia. It would be the truth against her empire. I shut down the monitors and stepped outside. The generator hummed steadily in the cool night air, a heartbeat against the dark. I touched the casing lightly, as if thanking it for standing guard. Across the street, the clubhouse lights flickered, a reminder of the rot I'd seen beneath its surface. Patricia thought this was a game of appearances. She didn't realize she'd already lost the moment real codes entered the field, and I was the one holding the playbook. The next day dawned heavy, like the air itself knew something was about to break. I was in the yard trimming dead petals from the roses when I noticed Victor pacing on the sidewalk across the street. His hands were jammed deep into his pockets, shoulders hunched forward, lips moving without sound. He looked like a man carrying a secret that wanted out but didn't know how to escape. I didn't move toward him, didn't push. Instead, I kept clipping roses, letting the snip of the shears mark each second until finally he drifted closer. His eyes stayed low, locked on the pavement. "You didn't hear this from me," he muttered, barely louder than the wind. "But you need to know what's happening in that clubhouse." I looked at him, steady. "What did Patricia do?" He flinched at the name, as though even speaking it was dangerous. His arms folded across his chest, body angled away. From the street, like he was afraid neighbors might be watching. Then, with a shaky exhale, he finally met my eyes. "She's pushing the board to fast-track foreclosure on your property. She said once you're out, the roses come out too. She made it personal. And..." His voice trailed off, but his hands told the rest, nails digging into his palms, a tremor running down his fingers. "And what?" I pressed gently. He shook his head before forcing the words out. "She knows about the generator. She bragged at last night's closed meeting that she'd have it ripped out. Said the board would classify it as a nuisance. I tried to tell her, tried to remind them about medical protections. But she shut me down. I shouldn't even be telling you this." I set the shears down. The roses swayed behind me, a line of thorns standing taller than either of us. "Why are you telling me?" Victor's jaw tightened. "Because she's crossing lines, Daniel, not just HOA lines, legal ones. And if it blows up, the whole community pays. Insurance hikes, lawsuits, maybe worse. You're the only one who knows enough to stop it." He rubbed his temples like the weight of betrayal was splitting him in two. His body language screamed conflict, half his stance angled toward retreat, the other half desperate for someone to understand. I lowered my voice. "Victor, I've already documented the violations in the clubhouse. Structural, electrical, chemical. If the city inspector sees them, Patricia's board won't survive the fallout." His eyes widened, fear mixing with relief. "Then you've got to move fast. She's planning to issue the lien notice this week." He pressed a folded paper into my hand, his fingers trembling as they brushed mine. "Draft minutes from the meeting. Don't ask how I got them. Just use them." I tucked the paper into my pocket without unfolding it. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. He looked around, shoulders twitching as if shadows might overhear us. "I don't want to be dragged into this, but I can't let her do it either. You didn't hear it from me." With that, he turned sharply and walked back toward his house, each step quicker than the last. I stood alone in the yard, the folded paper heavy in my pocket, the roses brushing against my arm like a reminder of why this mattered. Patricia had crossed into reckless territory, targeting medical equipment, plotting foreclosure as punishment, and now I had an insider confirming it. That night, I spread the photos, bylaws, and Victor's draft minutes across my desk like pieces of a puzzle. One by one, the lines connected. Patricia's obsession with appearances, her neglect of safety standards, her personal vendetta against my family. With Victor's confession, it wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof of intent. The generator hummed outside, steady and faithful, while I built the framework of my case. Patricia believed she controlled the narrative, but the moment Victor handed me that paper, the story stopped belonging to her. I looked out the window at the roses glowing faintly under the porch light. My father had always said thorns weren't there to hurt. They were there to protect. I finally understood. By the time the sun broke the horizon, I had my plan mapped out. The stack of evidence on my desk wasn't just photographs and notes anymore. It was a loaded arsenal, but I knew going head-to-head with Patricia without precision would be suicide. She thrived on intimidation, on pushing people into mistakes. If I was going to dismantle her, it had to be systematic. I started by categorizing every piece of data. Clubhouse electrical failures went in one folder, pool chemical storage in another, ADA violations in a third. Each was cross-referenced with the state safety code. I highlighted every clause that showed the HOA had no authority to bypass municipal standards. That distinction mattered. It would shift the battle from a petty neighborhood spat to a question of legal liability. Victor's draft minutes sat at the top of the pile, like a loaded trigger. His body language still haunted me, hands trembling, shoulders tight, as he handed it over. Those pages proved Patricia's intent to target my generator and Rose's specifically. Combined with the safety violations, it created a damning picture: selective harassment against one resident while ignoring dangerous risks for everyone else. At lunch, I drove to City Hall under the guise of checking on permits. The marble lobby echoed with every step, sterile and cold, but I felt grounded here. I met briefly with a building inspector I trusted, a man named Collins who'd been in the field longer than most of the board members had lived in the neighborhood. I didn't reveal everything yet, but I asked pointed questions about ADA compliance, backup power protections, and liability for chemical storage. His answers lined up exactly with what I needed. The HOA had no shield if negligence could be proven. "Document it thoroughly," Collins said, leaning across the counter. "Don't just hand it to me. Make it airtight. If the city has to step in, we'll need to show patterns, not one-offs." That was exactly my plan. Back home, Emily watched me spread everything across the kitchen table. "You're building something," she said softly, a touch of pride in her tired voice. "Not just for us," I answered. "For everyone who's been too scared to fight back." Her hand rested briefly on mine. That silent support steadied me more than any report ever could. Through the afternoon, I refined the framework. My training in compliance had always been about prevention, but now it was about strategy. I sketched the flow of a presentation, starting with the Roses, moving to the generator, then unveiling the hidden dangers Patricia had ignored. The goal wasn't just to defend myself, it was to expose the hypocrisy in front of the entire community. By evening, the binders were ready. I had 3, one for municipal violations, one for Patricia's targeted harassment, and one for broader community impact. Each was tabbed, color-coded, and backed with photo evidence. They weren't just documents. They were weapons, polished and sharpened. As the generator hummed outside, steady and faithful, I imagined the confrontation ahead. Patricia would laugh at first, dismiss it as overreach, but once the codes, statutes, and Victor's insider minutes hit the table, the laughter would stop. I could already see the silence spreading through the room, neighbors shifting uncomfortably, realizing the Emperor had no clothes. Before bed, I stepped outside and touched the Roses gently, thorns pressing faintly against my fingertips. My father's voice echoed in memory. "Defend what matters, Daniel. Don't let anyone tell you it isn't worth it." The petals glowed pale in the porch light, fragile and defiant all at once. Tomorrow, the groundwork would be tested. Patricia thought she'd cornered me with notices and threats, but she didn't realize she was standing on a floor full of cracks. My job was to make sure everyone else saw them before it collapsed. The night before the board meeting, the air in my house felt thick with anticipation. I barely slept, though the generator's steady thrum should have been comforting. My mind cycled through every possible move Patricia might make. She thrived on ambush tactics, springing accusations mid-meeting, leveraging confusion. That wouldn't work this time. My binders weren't just evidence. They were shields and blades, depending on how I used them. Morning came gray and cool, the kind of weather that made the Roses stand out like splashes of fire against muted skies. I clipped one bloom and set it in a glass of water by the window, a reminder of why I couldn't afford hesitation. Emily brewed coffee, her silence filled with a tension I understood. Finally, she asked, "Do you think the neighbors will listen?" "They don't have to listen to me," I said, sliding the binders into a leather case. "They'll listen to the law when they realize their safety and money are on the line." Her nod was quiet approval. The community center parking lot was already half full when I arrived. Clusters of homeowners loitered outside, their chatter tinged with nervous curiosity. Patricia stood near the entrance, wrapped in her usual air of smug authority, clipboard in hand. She caught my eye and smirked as though the outcome were already settled. I brushed past her without acknowledging the gesture, feeling Victor's gaze flicker from the corner of the lot. He hovered near the door, pale and restless, avoiding eye contact with Patricia. His hands fidgeted like a man torn between two loyalties. He knew what I carried inside that case. The boardroom smelled faintly of dust and chlorine from the adjoining pool. The long table was set, with water pitchers and cheap microphones. Patricia took her seat at the center, flanked by her loyalists, all stiff backs and folded arms. The rest of the neighborhood filled the rows of plastic chairs, murmuring until the gavel struck. Patricia wasted no time. "First item of business," she said, voice dripping with false composure. "The ongoing non-compliance issue with Mr. Daniel Mercer's property. Specifically, his unauthorized generator and the unsightly condition of his yard." The word unsightly made a ripple pass through the room. Neighbors exchanging glances at the rose garden they knew was anything but. Patricia leaned forward. "The board proposes fines, escalating weekly until removal." She expected me to flinch, to sputter. Instead, I opened my case and placed the first binder on the table with deliberate calm. "Before we talk fines, let's talk liabilities," I said, my voice steady, but loud enough to cut through the whispers. The room went quiet. Patricia's smirk faltered. "This," I tapped the binder, "is a collection of state safety codes your board has ignored. Faulty clubhouse wiring, improper chemical storage by the pool, both far greater risks to our community than a compliant generator installed by a licensed contractor." Murmurs surged again, this time sharper, edged with concern. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Irrelevant. We're here to discuss your violations." I slid the second binder forward. "And here are the draft minutes from your last closed-door meeting." Gasps broke out. "Minutes that prove my generator and even my roses were targeted by name. Selective enforcement, Patricia. Illegal by both state law and your own bylaws." Victor shifted uneasily in his chair, face pale, confirming the truth without a word. Neighbors leaned forward now, sensing blood in the water. Patricia tried to interject, but I raised my voice just enough to stay ahead of her. "This isn't about one resident refusing to comply. This is about leadership abusing authority while ignoring real dangers to the rest of us. You want to fine me? Fine. But you'll also have to explain to the city why those ADA violations exist at the clubhouse, and why pool chemicals are stored within 30 feet of the children's play area." The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. Patricia's hand tightened around her gavel, knuckles whitening. For the first time, her composure cracked. I ended with calm precision. "We all deserve safety, fairness, and respect. What we don't deserve is selective harassment while negligence endangers our families. This stops tonight." The crowd didn't cheer, yet. But their faces told me everything. Patricia's grip on the room had slipped. The first crack in her armor had been struck, and everyone had seen it. The days after the board meeting felt strangely suspended, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Patricia had been rattled, her composure, shaken in front of the very people she relied on to keep control, but she wasn't beaten. I knew her well enough to recognize that silence was just another weapon. She would retreat, calculate, and come back harder. That meant my preparation had to go deeper. I spread the binders across my dining room table, each one marked with colored tabs. Safety codes, bylaws, precedents, financial irregularities. But binders alone wouldn't win. This was bigger than paperwork now. It was about framing the truth in a way the community couldn't ignore. Patricia played on fear and apathy. I had to play on something stronger. Trust. Victor's hesitation at the meeting lingered in my mind. His silence had said more than any words could. He wasn't loyal to Patricia. He was terrified of her. That fear made him dangerous if left unchecked, but invaluable if I could reach him. I found my chance 2 nights later. He was outside the clubhouse, struggling to lock the maintenance shed. His hands trembled, fumbling with the key. When he saw me, his eyes widened, but he didn't flee. That was my opening. "You looked sick the other night?" I said quietly. "Like you wanted to stand up but couldn't." His jaw clenched. He avoided my gaze. "You don't know what it's like. She'll ruin me." "Patricia only has power as long as you let her." I stepped closer. "I don't need you to testify, not yet. But When the time comes, if you tell the truth, you won't be standing alone." Victor finally looked at me. The fight in his eyes was faint, but it was there. He didn't answer, just shoved the key into the lock and stormed off. That was enough. Seeds take time to grow. Back home, I shifted to the tactical side. Patricia's next move would be to discredit me. She'd paint me as a rogue homeowner, stirring trouble, risking property values. Fine. Let her. I had something she couldn't spin. The neighborhood's lived reality. I started walking the streets at dusk, when people lingered on porches or watered their lawns. I asked quiet questions. Had they ever received arbitrary warnings, unexplained fines, sudden rule changes? One by one, stories spilled out. A swing set threatened with removal. A disabled veteran fined for a ramp that was unsightly. A widow told her mailbox color violated an unrecorded guideline. Each account added weight to the case, but more importantly, it built momentum. Neighbors realized they weren't isolated victims. They were part of a pattern. Emily helped me collate everything. She had a gift for detail I sometimes lacked, organizing testimonies into concise statements that read like a chorus instead of scattered complaints. Together, we built a dossier, not just of my fight, but of everyone's. Late that night, as I slid the final stack of pages into place, I felt a calm certainty settle over me. This wasn't just self-defense anymore, it was community defense. Patricia wanted to isolate me, to make me the example she crushed. Instead, I was becoming the rallying point. The victory strategy had shifted into full view. I wasn't walking into the next confrontation as one man with a binder. I was walking in with the unspoken weight of dozens of neighbors, each one tired of being silenced. Still, I kept my tone measured when I rehearsed my words aloud, standing in the living room as if the audience were already before me. The goal wasn't anger, it was authority. Patricia thrived on painting opponents as irrational. My job was to be undeniable. I ended my rehearsal the same way I planned to end the real confrontation, with a promise delivered evenly, without heat, but heavy with conviction. This community deserves leadership that protects instead of punishes, and we're done letting fear run the show. The next meeting was already on the calendar. Patricia wouldn't know it yet, but it would be her stage, and her unraveling. The night of the board meeting arrived, and the clubhouse parking lot looked like it hadn't in years, overflowing with cars, headlights cutting through the dusk as neighbors filed in. People didn't usually show up to these sessions. Patricia had long relied on apathy to keep her grip tight, but tonight was different. Tonight, the room belonged to us. Inside, the air buzzed with something raw, uneasy. Folding chairs scraped across the tile as neighbors squeezed in shoulder to shoulder. Some clutched manila envelopes. Others held nothing but folded arms and tight jaws. The stories we'd gathered had reached them. They hadn't come to watch. They'd come to be heard. Patricia sat at the head table, flanked by two loyal board members. Her smile was all porcelain, polished, brittle. She tapped her gavel sharply, trying to project calm authority. But the crowd murmured restlessly, drowning out the hollow sound. "Order," she called. "This is a scheduled board meeting, and we will proceed according to agenda." I rose before she could launch into her rehearsed speech. My binder was under my arm, but I didn't open it yet. Instead, I spoke plainly. "Before you rush through another agenda, there are voices here that haven't been heard, and tonight, that ends." A ripple moved through the audience, nervous, expectant. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You are out of line, Daniel. You do not set the order of these proceedings." "Neither do you," I replied steady. "The community does, and they're here now." Emily, sitting near the front, caught my eye and gave a slight nod. That small gesture grounded me. I invited the first neighbor forward, a young mother cradling a folder of violation notices. Her voice trembled at first as she described being fined for her children's swing set. But when she held up the letter, her words found strength. "They told me it lowered property values. What about my kids' childhood?" The room erupted with soft gasps and murmurs of agreement. Next came the veteran rolling forward in his chair. His ramp, built so he could enter his own home, had been labeled a violation. "They said it was unsightly," he growled. "You tell me, what's uglier, a ramp or a neighbor forced to beg for access to his own front door?" By now, Patricia's mask was cracking. She tapped her pen, lips tightening, eyes darting to the board members beside her. They looked ashen, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. I finally opened my binder, laying out the pattern. This isn't about bylaws. This is about power used as a weapon, and it ends tonight. Patricia snapped back, her voice rising above the crowd. You think you can stand here and smear me? These are rules every homeowner agreed to when they moved here. Her outburst only fueled the energy in the room. Neighbors shouted back, "Not like this! You've gone too far!" The tide had turned. For once, fear wasn't silencing them. I raised my hand, and the room settled. Patricia, you're right about one thing. There are rules, but there's also responsibility. And when leadership uses rules to punish instead of protect, it forfeits trust. Then I turned to the board members. This isn't just about her. You've seen what she's done. You've watched it happen. Tonight, you decide if you stand with her, or with the community you're supposed to serve. Victor sat frozen at the table, sweat beading on his forehead. His jaw worked like he wanted to speak but couldn't. Finally, with a shaky breath, he stood, his voice cracked but carried. She told me to issue fines I knew weren't right. I did it because I was afraid, but he's right. It has to stop. The room erupted, cheers, clapping, even tears. Patricia's face drained of color. For the first time, she looked small. I let the noise settle, then spoke with quiet finality. We're not asking for change anymore. We're demanding it. The gavel in Patricia's hand trembled. She slammed it down once, but the sound was swallowed by the crowd's roar. The noise from the board meeting still rang in my ears as the neighbors spilled out into the cool night air. For the first time in months, maybe years, I saw hope instead of resignation in their faces. Patricia slipped away through a side door, her loyalists scurrying after her, but her grip had shattered. The people weren't afraid anymore. We gathered outside in the parking lot under the streetlights. Neighbors formed clusters, speaking in hushed but excited tones. Some patted me on the back, others embraced each other. Emily leaned into me, her hand resting on her stomach. You did it, she whispered, but I shook my head. We did it, together. Victor approached, his expression a mix of relief and shame. He looked older than he had just hours before. I should have spoken up sooner, he said quietly. I let her bully me into silence. I met his eyes. What matters is that you finally did. You helped turn the tide tonight, and the community won't forget that. He nodded, visibly lighter, as if the confession had released years of weight. The following week, petitions circulated faster than anyone imagined. Neighbors lined up to sign, demanding Patricia's removal and immediate reforms. What once seemed impossible now looked inevitable, and within 2 weeks, the recall vote passed with an overwhelming majority. Patricia was gone. When the dust settled, we held a meeting, not in the sterile confines of the clubhouse, but in the park beneath the old oak tree at the entrance of the neighborhood. That tree, planted by the original founders, had stood through storms and droughts, its branches stretching across generations. To me, it had always been a quiet reminder of endurance, of legacy. This time, the voices that rose beneath it weren't full of fear, they were filled with possibility. Parents spoke about safer play areas for kids. Seniors asked for better access ramps and benches. People who hadn't said a word in years were finally speaking up, and others were listening. I stood with Emily beside me, her hand in mine, and addressed the gathering. This place, our homes, our streets, this community, should never have been about fines and threats. It should have been about belonging. Tonight, we start again, together. Applause followed, but more importantly, conversations bloomed in every direction. Neighbors who had avoided each other were now planning, dreaming. The oak's branches stretched overhead, as though sheltering this fragile new beginning. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Emily and I lingered beneath the tree. She rested against me, her voice soft but steady. Your father would have been proud. The words hit deep. My father had always believed in standing firm against injustice, in protecting what mattered most. I carried his legacy here, not through anger, but through resolve. And now, as the neighborhood breathed easier, I felt that promise fulfilled. I looked around, the swing set being rebuilt in one yard, neighbors offering to help fix the veterans' ramp, children chasing each other under the streetlights. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive again. For the first time in a long while, I believed the future here would be brighter than the past. Patricia's reign of intimidation was over. What remained was ours to shape. I tightened my grip on Emily's hand. "This is just the beginning," I murmured, and it was. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.